here is part of what he called to prepare for my coming. Now here's the architect of the Carolinas campaign. Depending on what side of the fence you're on, he's a brilliant campaign strategist. Never won a battle, but he's never lost a campaign. Or he could be on the other side of the fence where he's the devil incarnate, depending on where you're from. But in December of 1864, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman presented the city of Savannah, Georgia to Abraham Lincoln as a Christmas gift. And then the question became what to do with 60,000 hardened veterans. Where are we going to go next? There's no really Confederate army in Georgia to confront them. Sherman's boss, Ulysses S. Grant, who will pop up here in a second, wanted Sherman's army moved north up to Virginia because there's been a bloody stalemate around Richmond and Petersburg with Confederate General Robert E. Lee. So Grant wants 60,000 men immediately sent to Virginia to help turn the tide against Bobby Lee. But there's simply not enough naval or contracted vessels to move that many men that quickly to Virginia. So Sherman will propose to Grant, let me march my army north through the Carolinas. And when I do that, I will destroy anything and everything of military value that sustains the Confederate war effort. A railroad, an arsenal, a mill. I don't like newspapers, so I'm going to destroy them too. Okay, so there's that impact. But more importantly, folks, is the psychological impact that by marching an army pretty much unmolested through enemy territory, the young sons and men and brothers and husbands and stuff that are serving in Robert E. Lee's army around Petersburg and Virginia, their mamas and sisters and wives are writing them saying, hey, you need to come home. There's this army marching through, just ravaging the countryside. We're going to go hungry right now because this men came in and took everything we had food-wise. So it has that kind of psychological impact. But by bottom line, Sherman gets approval, and on the first week of February, he will begin his march north. Now, as I mentioned before, to Sherman, this is Goldsboro, North Carolina, about 3 or 4 years after the war. But what's important here, this first railroad right here, is the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad that runs all the way down to Morehead City. Morehead City is a port. Here's the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, which runs south down to Goldsboro. You see, these operations here in eastern North Carolina, and really what this book is all about, from the Union side, it's all for the want of a railroad. Sherman needs one of these railroads to the port so the Navy and the Quartermaster Corps can resupply him in Goldsboro. Now, here's Sherman coming up to Savannah. He's going to be shadowed by General Hardee out of Charleston, Confederate commanders here. You also, down around Wilmington, all of a sudden, Wilmington's the focus to General Grant. You have the operations to capture Fort Fisher in mid-January, and by 22 February, Wilmington will have been captured. But here's Confederate forces under General Bragg and Hope moving towards Goldsboro. Here's young Sergeant Truesdale, that long journey I was talking about. But part of also the bigger strategic move is Union forces, General Schofield's 23rd Corps, will move all the way from Tennessee via riverboat, steamboat, all the way railroad to Annapolis and Alexandria, where they get on the boats and head all the way down to Morehead City in Wilmington. So you see, like I said, folks, it's part of the eastern North Carolina is going from a sleepy little Blackwater area to now a part of a major theater of operation right in this area right here. Now, Sherman's boss, Ulysses S. Grant, this focus on January 29th, he would literally come on the 27th, he sails down to the Cape Fear where he meets with General Terry and Admiral Porter, but on the way back up, he kind of sneaks in past Fort Macon down there at Atlantic Beach, comes to the port at Morehead City. The gentleman in command of those 12,000 Union soldiers I was telling you about was Brigadier General Innocent Palmer. Now, poor Palmer does not know that his boss's boss's boss just showed up at the port at Morehead City. So Palmer screams down the railroad from New Bern, has a conversation for several hours with General Grant. But what Grant tells him, and this date is important, folks, basically get the railroad going from New Bern towards Goldsboro. You see, between Kinston and New Bern, early in mid-war, the Confederates had pulled up all the iron. So the railroad bed is there, but there's about 17 miles of that railroad that Sherman wants that the railroad engineers need to come in and relay. So what Grant is telling Palmer, you need to get going on this. Now look at that date. Now watch this. On February 25th, guess what? Palmer is summoned down to Wilmington to brief General Schofield on the success of his operation so far, almost a month. And guess what? That railroad's not moved 1 inch west towards Goldsboro. Unfortunately for Palmer, he's immediately relieved of command, and it's quite sad because I don't know what he thought his intentions were when he was summoned down there. He brought his wife with him. His staff officers brought their wives. I think maybe they thought they were going to a picnic at Fort Fisher or something. But within hours of showing up, he's relieved of command. Schofield returned to one of his trusted division commanders, the Canadian Jacob D. Cox, who will take over command and immediately sails back up to New Bern and gets this operation going. Now, Cox, just 2 nights. This is the old Gaston Hotel in downtown New Bern near the riverfront. Now, look at the focus here. He only spends less than 48 hours in this hotel, and he's immediately got this army assembled and on the move. Schofield's orders to Cox are pretty specific. And what I highlight, folks, is, once again, the Union forces are not looking for a fight. All they care about is a railroad from New Bern to Goldsboro. It's all about being able to meet Sherman mid-March when he reaches Goldsboro. Now, General Cox will have about 13,000 men. They do retain Palmer because he is very knowledgeable, but part of those 12,000 men are broken up in these 2 ad hoc divisions, and they're not veteran soldiers, which will come back and bite them later on in this fight. The only veteran soldiers is this group from 1st Division, General Ruger's. They came from Tennessee as well. But when Cox departs New Bern, Ruger's boys are still getting off the boats in Morehead City. Now, they'll begin that march early in the morning of March 2nd. I just want to highlight a couple individuals here. This is Cornelius C. Cusick from the 132nd New York. What's neat about the 132nd, they have several companies of Native Americans. And if you're familiar with some of our early settlement here in North Carolina, the Tuscarora Indians were just west of New Bern. And there's actually a crossroads there today, Tuscarora, if you look at when you go travel down the highway. Well, Cornelius C. Cusick was a Tuscarora chief. But once the settlements came through, the Tuscaroras went north up into the Iroquois Nation in northern New York, and that's how you see the connection here. The other scoundrel, as I like to call him, is George W. Graham. You see, he's a North Carolina volunteer, U.S. Now, George W. Graham he's got a reputation as a fighter, but unfortunately he also has a reputation for being, if he likes your property, whether you're pro-Union or pro-Confederate, he's going to take it. That's the kind of reputation, a drunk, a brawler, womanizer, but he's a heck of a warfighter. But what's important is he's the only North Carolina Union volunteer unit that's allowed to go west of New Bern. Why? Because in the summer of '64, the Confederates captured a good number of these North Carolina Union volunteers, and they hung 22 of them because they used to wear this color, and now they're wearing this color. So they're afraid when they go wet, when they move towards Goldsboro, if they get into contact with the Confederates, they're probably going to desert because they know what's going to happen. Now here's New Bern, Kinston, Neuse River. Here's the railroad that's so critical right here. And when Cox moves west, he's going to move primarily on the railroad here. Why? Because as this infantry advances, the railroad engineers are going to be slowly laying the track. Now, on March 2nd, along Southwest Creek here, heavily fortified, but there's Colonel John M. Whitford. General Cox back here thinks, in his own words, he describes the Confederate defenses here as of questionable reliability. Young boys and old men. Little does he know there's a thunderstorm brewing back here, but when he starts this march, it's pretty weak defenses here. And they move very rapidly here to the March 2nd through the 5th. Now, all this doesn't go unnoticed by the Confederates. This young lady up here in the corner